Yeah, today wanted to talk a little bit about an article that Chris you co-wrote with one Armando, and we just posted it on GEO today, titled "Recommendations for Practicing Language Justice." Um, that was the title I came up with. So if it's a bad title, you can blame me. But I thought it was a pretty good article, and he just had some thoughts. Sounds like you and Armando have been doing translation for social justice movements and stuff like that for quite a while, and had some input for people who want to incorporate that into their work. So I don't know. Want to give us your little elevator speech on this, Chris?
Um, yeah, by the way, our friend says it all sounds good after hearing all
Excellent.
of us speak. Do you want to screen share it, the article?
Oh yeah, I should do that. Let's see.
Yeah, I've kind of already forgotten some of what I wrote. Um, and okay, so yeah, so I don't know if we were gonna write this article um, prior to Aju, I think, or you bring saying that maybe we should write something about it. Um, So the origin of writing it, I think, might have come from Geo. Um, but yeah, I thought it'd be good because I've honestly at this point it seems like the lowest point that I've seen people being willing to translate. Um, and so we it was a good opportunity for Armando and I to think more about how things need to improve, because usually what we do is just kind of gripe about it um, how draining and miserable it is to translate a lot of times. um, it's always nicer to translate when it's relatives, or neighbors on the block, but it's when it gets outside of that, it's a lot more difficult. So we wrote up, what is it, like 13 recommendations or something, and first two are just for like translators to think about, um, aimed at translators, but anybody can look at those, to be ready to support them in case translators decide they do want to do this. um, and the last is for everyone to read. And I feel like the context of this was one where we're talking about translators who have no training, who are just pulled into things, whether it's for their family or social justice movements. Because that's how I've seen most translators. It's kind of rare to come across professional translators, in my normal routine. And so yeah, and yeah, in a lot of social justice groups as well. That's what I see. I've never I'm not sure I've ever seen a social justice group hire a professional translator to do anything. It's always relying on who happens to be uh, bilingual or multilingual. Um, so yeah, there's the
And
article,
it,
and go ahead, Josh.
okay, yeah. Well, and just to clarify, in your case, when you're talking about translation, are you including also interpretation? Is that is something, or is this just strictly translating text? Is that what you have done mostly, or
Right, both, both,
okay, both?
and
Yeah, gotcha.
definitely sign language as well. Um,
Mm.
Bro, maybe that's something that we should have clarified too. Because that's also something that I almost never see as well. There's always a I've never seen social justice groups go so far as to include Braille, or sign language in anything. So maybe that's something that we both overlooked, and that's kind of like a weakness that we ourselves need to address. But yeah, if you have any questions about the article or the recommendations, it was meant for a Chicago audience, but we're like, well, since Geo's is kind of initiated this discussion. Let's put up on the GEO website, and then we can just share it from there to our friends in Chicago.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I thought it had some good recommendations. The one that really kind of stuck out to me is a little unexpected, I guess, was the creating an offers list to your group. So creating like doing an offers and needs market, which is a, a a practice where people get together and write down, lists of things that needs that they have, and then things that they can offer to other people, and then try to set people up with to match the offers and needs together. Um, and so, yeah, one of your suggestions in here is to create an offers list for your group, which I thought was pretty, kind of creative way, like trying to think a little bit outside the box of, and obviously, if people, if organizations have finances to just, pay for these services, that's, certainly what should be done. But there's other ways that, we could, uh, try to remunerate people, even if we don't necessarily have financing for it, because that's certainly something that has come up at Geo. We would love to have, simultaneous interpretation for all of our events and get every single one of our articles translated into every single language, at least Spanish. But that's expensive, and we have one article that we did. We paid a cooperative to do the translation for us. It was pricey. It was not expensive, and certainly not something that's not like in our budget to do for every article. Like no way. So um, trying to come up with those other things I thought was good. Matt, do you have any thoughts as somebody who's worked in this field a little?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I totally identify with what Chris was talking about earlier. Like, I remember the first time I got kind of pressed into interpreting, and it was for a group of Spanish speaking members of a political organization called Solidarity. And my Spanish was terrible. I mean, it was just that at least I had something. That was kind of the standard. So the idea in that case, it was just like, do the best you can. Would just the goal is to facilitate communication, and it may not be perfect, it may not be beautiful, but some level of understanding was the target. Um, and then later, when I lived in Japan, interpreting was a big thing because there was often a question of kind of English and Japanese. That was the issue there, because English was kind of, you could predict, would be the language that foreigners in general would probably understand to some extent. So it was the lingua franca for political activism, etc. And the Japanese groups that I worked with, the kind of activist groups and academic groups both, were very principled about paying for interpreting, and paying for translation, and took it very seriously. And so there were some really excellent, excellent interpreters and translators, and they set very high standard. Sometimes I thought they set the standard too high because, I started out with we're just trying to communicate something. We can help a little bit. That's at least a step. So there were times when I felt like they needed to, particularly a really close friend of mine who was an excellent interpreter, his standards were just too high. It was like his interpretation was so spot on that very few people could really operate at that level. So that was there was an interesting debate about how good does an interpretation have to be, right? How perfect does it have to be? Sometimes in a couple of events, more of the academic world, people would get outside professional interpreters. And in my experience, they were super proficient, of course, but they weren't that helpful because they typically weren't people involved in the movements. And so they weren't great at They couldn't think ahead about, okay, here's what the listeners need to understand about this situation for this what's being discussed to make sense, right? They would just go straight from the text. And that was not actually that helpful. It was sort of better to have people who were a little rough around the edges but understood the movements than to have people who are perfect. But yeah, I'm like, this is all these issues are totally near and dear to me.
Yeah, and I gotta say, it does feel like there's maybe a bit of a chicken and egg issue because I do, I've been at events. And I think we've even had an event. I know we have, uh, you know, I've been at events, okay, where there is interpretation offered, and maybe nobody makes use of it, for the session. Um, and and I think and a lot of for a lot of groups that's going to make sense. That's probably going to happen because you're not used to being a group like GEO. We haven't done a whole lot of events that are in Spanish. So why would Spanish speakers who don't speak English be even looking at us in the first place to know that we're offering that? um, and then it's like if you do that once or twice, and okay, well we hired ICM or whoever to do our interpretation, and we had to pay them, but turned out it wasn't actually needed, or nobody was there who wanted it. um and then it makes it kind of hard to justify again, or it makes it difficult to say, oh, should we keep putting money into this when if you're in an organization that's already got a tiny budget. And so if I feel like there's some kind of like outreach as well, maybe, that needs to go along with it, so that just so people know when interpretation services are being offered, um, so that it doesn't feel like a waste, right? But,
Yeah, I was just yesterday in the meeting of the solidarity economy principles and practices. What is it called? Community gathering of community. But yeah, that's a good example of what you're talking about. Like there, it was everything was uh, there was interpretation into Spanish. And there were, as following a lot of what Chris's recommendations are, which I think are really good recommendations, and they were following a lot of them. In terms of the number of people who were there, the fact that they were prepared and supported, etc. I think what made it work is that they actually, it's connected to who the audience is, right? And the participants include people who are operating in Spanish. So it's necessary, it's meaningful, it's not just a gesture or kind of like, in case somebody out there needs to hear it in Spanish. It's like very much based on who the people are who are participating. But excellent job. Also, May 1st, .coop. They do, again, they have like a real base because they have an organization in Mexico, based in Mexico. And so they're bilingual. It's a bilingual organization, and they do it 100%. It's like completely on. It's really impressive. But I guess you're right. There is like a total. It makes the most sense. It's the most meaningful when you're really building bilingual or multilingual organizations. Um, that's an important thing to think about. Who are you organizing with, right? It's not just about interpreting. It's about who are you in communication with.
That's a good point, though. I know exactly what you're talking about. Um, the whole chicken and egg situation. I guess maybe one thing that might be added to that would be, if it's not stated enough, relationship building with translators, and that's probably where the translator co-op is really important to help hold some of the conversations and facilitate some of that relationship building and understanding about capacity. What I can say for sure is probably one of the difficult things is to ask somebody to set aside time to translate, and offer no remuneration, not even like an offers list, and then it's not even needed, and that wasn't indicated ahead of time, that it's a maybe. Um, but yeah, I think yeah the relationship building is probably something that if I could go back and edit, it's probably what I would add, because that's yeah I understand exactly what you're
Mhm.
saying. It's like it's really hard to yeah want to be inclusive, not have a budget, not know when it's gonna be needed. But sometimes what I'll do too is I'll just ask people like, "Are you sure there's people gonna show up who are gonna need it? Like, what's the likelihood really?" Um, but things have gotten easier for me when it comes to translating because I so I it's either I just like translate documents. I mean, what I mostly do is translate documents where there's not really much of a deadline or the deadline's pretty far, and then I just do like emergency translations, like where I'm on the ground. Um, that system for me is kind of the easiest. I don't other live interpretation. I really can't. It doesn't really work for me. If it's not an emergency, I just don't want to be part of it. It's how I've drawn my line, but it's a big problem. Maybe part of me drawing my line is also being willing to work with others to help address this translation issue. Um, yeah, check.
Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah, definitely it's something that we need to think about more. And one thing that I think, people have good intentions often, but then we'll kind of, flub it in the execution, like that's like, oh, hold up. YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain a smooth streaming. Um, anyway, we're having that error message or shown. So at any rate, we'll, want to be inclusive. And so have somebody get somebody to show up to do interpretation and then it's not needed. Or the thing that I like pull my hair out all the time. I'm often watching videos from conferences or, when I was going to conferences, the interpreters will always say at the beginning to the English speakers, please speak slowly because Spanish takes a lot longer to convey the same information. And I mean, 99% of the time, right? Everybody gets there and like, okay, sure. And then they just go and talk in their regular tone. And, there has to be like, please slow down, please slow down. And that I feel like is something that's just incumbent upon all of us if we're, and especially us native English speakers and monolinguistic clowns, we need to, think like, if we really care, like really think about that. And it is, a skill, just like, doing the interpretations of skills. Like I think we all need to practice the skill of slowing down, speaking slowly. Um, yeah, when we're doing this.
That
Oh, and our
reminds
internet connection is good again. So
that
stay
reminds me
tuned.
of a funny episode where again, when I was really just starting out doing, and I had to do like live, like simultaneous interpretation, Spanish to English, or English. This case was English to Spanish. Way worse, right? For much more difficult for me. And I was doing it, and Ken Paff from TDU was the speaker. And Ken is like a Midwestern kind of guy. He uses lots of metaphors and stories and colorful language and all this stuff. And he went on some thing about dinosaurs, and I was like, "How on earth am I going to interpret this?" So the people I was interpreting for, I knew them. They're all like activist friends of mine, and I just instead of interpreting what he was saying, I would just drop into commentary like, "Oh my god, this is impossible. This guy's talking about dinosaurs. I don't know what to tell you." And they were all laughing, and then I'd kind of wait until I could figure out what the point was that I could summarize. But it was really hilarious. Yeah, because he was certainly not slowing down, but not only not slowing down, he was not, making it easy at all. But But you know, again, I just think it. You know, my standard was totally at that point was you just do the best you can. You're just trying to make the room work for everybody who's in it to the degree that you can. And maybe you can do it perfectly, and maybe you can't. And I still think that's like a kind of an, I think that's an important from an activist when you're in an activist setting. That's like a very important principle. I think like that's what we're really trying to do. You know,